If 220 American soldiers have been killed in a single day, the political consequences for the administration are severe, regardless of whether the figure is accurate. The claim alone is now circulating through American media, social platforms, and congressional offices. Lawmakers are demanding briefings. Families of deployed personnel are attempting to reach their relatives. And the information vacuum created by official silence is being filled by speculation that is growing more alarming by the hour. The deployment of the doomsday plane has added a layer of nuclear anxiety to a domestic political situation that was already deeply unstable. Reports suggest that senior congressional leaders from both parties have been summoned for emergency classified briefings. The content of those briefings has not emerged publicly. But the faces of the legislators photographed leaving those sessions have carried expressions that several experienced Washington observers have described as visibly shaken. Netanyahu, monitoring the situation from an undisclosed location, is reportedly in direct communication with senior American officials. Israel's calculus in this conflict changes dramatically if American resolve wavers under the pressure of casualty figures and nuclear signaling happening simultaneously. What is being decided in those rooms right now will determine the next phase of this war. Beyond Washington and Tehran, the deployment of America's Nuclear Command aircraft has triggered alarm responses across a global security architecture that was already under extraordinary strain. In Moscow, the appearance of the doomsday plane was almost certainly detected within minutes by Russian early warning systems. Russia maintains its own equivalent aircraft for identical purposes. And the protocol between nuclear powers during periods of heightened tension requires each side to monitor these tests. The other's nuclear signaling with extreme care. Russian military channels are reportedly active at elevated levels in the hours following the deployment. China's response has been characteristically quiet but measurable. Chinese strategic rocket forces, according to analysts monitoring satellite and signals intelligence, have shown activity patterns in the past 24 hours that differ from baseline. Nothing that constitutes a direct escalation, but movements consistent with a nuclear power that has observed American nuclear signaling and is quietly adjusting its own posture in response. Meanwhile, across NATO, defense ministries have activated emergency consultation channels. Article 5 of the NATO treaty, the Collective Defense Clause, creates obligations that European governments are now quietly assessing in the context of what American commanders may be preparing to do next. The doomsday plane was built for a world where nuclear war was considered a genuine possibility. For decades, its deployment remained theoretical, a contingency, a worst-case scenario that serious people hoped would never be necessary. It is in the air right now, and the world it was built for may be closer than anyone was prepared to admit. The doomsday plane does not lie. It does not respond to propaganda. It does not take to the skies because of unverified claims or information warfare. It flies when American commanders have assessed something real enough, serious enough, and dangerous enough to require the activation of the last layer of nuclear command authority. Something triggered that assessment in the last 24 hours. Washington has not told the world what it was. And until that answer emerges, the plane will keep flying. The question now is not whether this conflict has reached the threshold of nuclear signaling. That threshold has already been crossed. The question is what happens when the PO lands, and whether the world it returns to will look anything like the one it left. In the 24 hours preceding the doomsday plane's deployment, Iranian forces reportedly launched one of the most concentrated waves of strikes since this conflict began. According to regional sources monitoring the situation, multiple American installations across the Middle East were targeted simultaneously. The coordination of the attack suggested advanced planning at a level of sophistication that U.S. intelligence had not fully anticipated. Bases in multiple countries were struck within a narrow time frame, stretching American defensive response capacity across too many locations at once. Iran is claiming the results were devastating. But Washington is presenting a carefully managed counter-narrative. U.S. officials are acknowledging the strike activity while strongly disputing the casualty figures Iran is broadcasting. American spokespeople are describing the attacks as largely intercepted, with damage contained and operational capacity unaffected. The 220 figure, they insist, is Iranian propaganda, a number designed for psychological impact rather than factual accuracy. What we know so far is this. The strikes happened. American defensive systems were activated across multiple locations simultaneously. And in the aftermath, a sequence of military decisions was made at the highest levels of American command authority that resulted in the most visible symbol of nuclear preparedness taking to the skies. Whether the casualty figures are accurate, exaggerated, or fabricated entirely, the doomsday plane does not respond to propaganda. It responds to threat assessments, classified ones, produced by intelligence agencies with access to information that neither Iranian state media nor American press briefings are currently sharing with the public. The moment reports of mass American casualties began circulating alongside news of the doomsday plane's deployment, financial marquees. ETS reacted with immediate and significant volatility. Oil prices surged. Defense stocks moved sharply. Safe haven assets, including gold, saw immediate buying pressure as traders began pricing in the possibility that this conflict was entering a phase that existing risk models had not fully accounted for. Because the economic consequences of what is now unfolding extend far beyond the battlefield. If Iranian casualty claims are even partially accurate, the political pressure on the American government to respond with overwhelming force becomes almost impossible to resist. A response at that scale against a country that sits on the northern coast of the Strait of Hormuz carries energy market implications that would ripple through every economy on the planet within days. Insurance markets for commercial shipping in the Gulf region have already registered the shock. Premiums for vessels transiting the strait have moved to levels that shipping companies are describing as approaching the threshold where some routes become economically unviable. The consequences will not remain confined to the region. Every percentage point that oil climbs adds pressure to inflation figures in economies that are already managing fragile recoveries. Supply chains that depend on stable energy costs begin making contingency decisions. And central banks in multiple countries are quietly running scenarios that nobody is publicly discussing yet. Inside Washington, the political pressure created by Iranian casualty claims has collided with an administration that was already managing a fragile domestic narrative about this conflict. There is one aircraft in America's arsenal that is never supposed to be seen. When it appears in the sky, it means something has gone catastrophically wrong. The E-6B Mercury, known in classified circles as the Doomsday Plane, exists for a single purpose: to survive a nuclear first strike and continue commanding America's nuclear forces from the air when ground-based command infrastructure has been destroyed or compromised. Its deployment is not routine. It is not symbolic. Every time this aircraft becomes airborne under emergency conditions, it means American military commanders have assessed a threat serious enough to activate the most extreme layer of the country's nuclear response architecture. And today, that plane is in the air. Two completely different accounts are now circulating, and both cannot be true. Iranian state media is reporting that in a single 24-hour period, Iranian strikes killed 220 United States military personnel across multiple locations in the region. According to Tehran's account, coordinated attacks targeted American bases with a precision and intensity that overwhelmed defensive systems. Iranian officials are framing the casualty figures not as an estimate, but as a verified count, a deliberate message sent directly to Washington and to the American public. Washington is telling a completely different story. U.S. defense officials have not confirmed any casualty figures remotely approaching that number. Official statements acknowledge ongoing Iranian strike activity, but describe American losses as significantly lower than Iranian claims suggest. The Pentagon is urging caution about unverified numbers emerging from Iranian state sources, describing the figures as part of an information warfare campaign designed to demoralize American public opinion. Two governments, two completely different versions of what happened in the last 24 hours. And in the space between those versions, one undeniable fact remains. The doomsday plane is airborne, and that aircraft does not leave the ground over unverified claims or information warfare. Something real triggered its deployment, and Washington has not yet told the world what that something was. To understand why the deployment of this aircraft matters, it is necessary to understand what it was built to do. During the Cold War, American military planners confronted a nightmare scenario. A sudden Soviet nuclear strike that destroyed Washington, disabled ground-based command centers, and left U.S. nuclear forces without leadership or authorization to respond. The solution was airborne command, aircraft that could survive the initial strike, stay aloft for extended periods, and manage America's nuclear arsenal from above the devastation below. The E-6B Mercury is the modern evolution of that Cold War solution. It carries the communications equipment necessary to reach submerged nuclear submarines carrying ballistic missiles. It can transmit launch authorization codes. It can coordinate a nuclear response, even if every ground-based facility in the United States has been destroyed. Its presence in the sky is, by design, the last resort of American nuclear command authority. Then everything changed in the last 24 hours. Reports of mass American casualties began emerging from regional sources simultaneously, with unusual military aircraft movements that flight tracking systems partially captured before the data was restricted. The sequence of events, according to analysts monitoring the situation, suggests that the doomsday plane's deployment was not precautionary. It was reactive. Something happened that American commanders assessed as requiring the activation of continuity of government protocols. What that something was remains officially undisclosed.